Okay, so we've looked at the side kick, chicken leg side kick. We'll look at kicks another time because they're quite big athletic movements, and there's better things for us to learn at this point that will help us even when we come to look at kicks again later on. But I want to begin with an exercise, a zhan exercise that's going to be useful as we explore today's theme, which is directional Fa Li, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So first thing we want to think about is the idea of mental induction that I've talked about before. And the first thing to say about that is when we get this feeling like that we're holding something, when we get this, talks about kind of locking into your posture, that you don't get through tensing. You can get like a pseudo sense that you're holding something by tensing all your muscles. That's what Wang Shangjai calls using clumsy force in this context. But by relaxing, using liminal muscle and mental, just the trigger to just kind of pull in, feeling like you're going to pull in. Remember I talked about there's like this borderline area where it's between the mental signal and the physical use of the muscles. No one can deny that you're physically using muscles to hold your arms out and even create this pulling in feeling. That feeling that we're trying to get, like this, we can call this like an isometric posture. And isometric just means that the muscles are being engaged, but you're not moving. So it's a very particular, as opposed to isotonic where the muscles are engaged, but they are moving. And the thing about this is we need this key Yiquan idea of mental induction, and how does this relate to our standing? So by mental induction, usually we mean that we're using some kind of visualization. We'll pretend it's that simple for the moment. But actually you don't need to do that to get this feeling. So that's very important. Sometimes there's an over fetishization of method in Yiquan, and people don't acknowledge enough that a lot of the things in Yiquan people can just do without standing, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But even within standing, if you want to get this feeling like the structural locks, I've talked about it before, it's not clumsy force, you're not tensing like that to create this sense that there's something there. You're relaxing, the more you relax, the more you eventually get this feeling like there's something there. And you can then play with that movement by like, you can do it very visibly like that, what Wang Shangjai calls micro movement, that you're just playing with the micro movement, you're just pushing against the lock. And I've explained in other videos why we kind of get that feeling, because we're using such a minimal amount of our muscle to actually trigger the posture, and it makes us feel like there's something really solid there. We don't need to use visualization to do that. Anyone can do that. Anyone can get that feeling. What we use visualization for is, well, we'll say it's this simple for a moment, to intensify the feeling, and that really does work. So I do exercises like when I'm doing this kind of movement, and I visualize. I have a couple of big visualizations that I use. One is like, well, they both have got like ropes or chains tied to my arms. One is that there's like a giant octopus out in the sea. I love the sea, so it's kind of like, I like sea visualizations. And there's the octopus moves its tentacles like I'm like almost like flying a kite. And this is one of the very important mental inductions that Yao Zhong used, that you flying a kite like, and it's pulling on your hands, but that doesn't really work for me in the same way. I like the big octopus, and it's lifting its, and I'm pulling it with the rope. And I also use one where there's a giant ship out at sea, and there's these enormously long chains, and I'm pulling them and I'm moving the ship, and that really does work. It intensifies the feeling. It intensifies the feeling physically in the body. This kind of use of visualization, even though it seemed very pie in the sky when Wang Shangjai was writing about it, now it's really just bog standard sports science. So mental induction is really flowered into something that we now know is like a really useful sports science concept. We can talk about maybe medicine and visualization around medicine another time. There is some studies done on that, but we shouldn't go too far into that without the proper research being done on it. So from our isometric stance, where we're holding the muscle but we're not moving it, holding the posture but not moving it, from our isometric posture, if we start visualizing, for example, that we're holding a ball, that's our isometric induction, mental induction, this key idea. We can say like we don't need to narrow down the idea of induction unhelpfully, but we don't want to widen it out uselessly. So we can think that like even just holding it without any kind of visualization is a kind of induction, because we're still consciously focused on the task of doing it, but our bodies will just do that mechanically eventually. As long as we relax enough, we'll create that feeling that we're holding something and lock us into that posture where we can use micro movement. But if we use the visualization of that ball being there, we can call that isometric induction. And for that reason, if we start moving slowly in like what we call shili, we can call that isotonic induction if we're using visualization to do it, because we're moving the muscles, but we're also using visualization to stimulate a stronger feeling. But there's another really important kind of induction that we use, and that's called pulse induction. Pulse, P-U-L-S-E, pulse induction. The kind of thing, you know, when a muscle man flexes their pectoral muscles to the music, and it's exactly the same thing really. If you tense a muscle, and I think it's easier to see it if you just tense the. Don't know if the camera's going to pick it up too much or not. You just tense the muscle like that. That's the kind of thing that we mean by pulse. That we just tense the muscle like. But what we want to do is two things. One, we want to isolate particular muscles, which is quite hard, just like with that exercise with the. I just haven't got the pecs for it. That kind of pectoral muscle induction, isolate the muscle. You know, there's a couple of ways of doing that. Obviously, one is to grow bigger muscles. That's what that kind of do before most people's time. Grow bigger muscles so that there's more nerve endings there that can do it. But we can also use mental induction to do that, to stimulate that kind of muscle pulse. And that's one of the things that's going to be really useful that we can develop through our standing. And it's going to be really, really important, because in order to, when we talk about whole body movement, actually we need different parts of the body to function in different ways within that whole body movement to create phased movements that I'll talk about in a moment. So we need, it's one of the contradictions that as we're rebelling against the way that society has kind of partitioned different parts of our bodies and say this part of your body is for this, and this part of your body is for that. You know, you don't think about this until you're doing that, and just psychologically, physically takes apart your body and divides it into different sections for different things, very often based around work or social dressage, that you must move in particular ways to signify different things, masculinity and femininity being the most important, deference and confidence and all different ways you're supposed to use your body. And we want to regain all of that and knit it all back together into a holistic system. One of the ironies of that is to do that in functional movement, actually we need to develop a finer grained control over individual parts of our body so that they can move in a very phased way. This machine, what we want it to do is very complicated. It's not all, if it was just all about moving in, if it was like whole body movement, like it's all got to move together at the same time, but it doesn't, it's all moving differently in different ways. So we need that ability to control different parts of the body in one holistic system, but all doing slightly different things. This pulse induction then that we need, well, we can start by thinking about it as an exercise. What we want isn't like if a flex like that of the muscle is a pulse, a muscle pulse. We want it liminal. We want it down to like just you relaxing and then it just fires a little bit like that. It's not so much the intensity that we're after. It's relaxation, and then you can get as much intensity as you want as long as you genuinely relax. Usually, to get a muscle pulse like that, like the muscle men do, you've got to tense the muscle quite a lot. You know, to get a big reaction on your leg like that, like for body popping. To get that kind of movement, you need it's relaxed, but it's too tense for what we want. Maybe body pop is not the best example because I think it is quite relaxed when you do that. But to start with anyway, we want to get it to a kind of very relaxed state and then just trigger the pulse. And we call this is directly pulse induction because you've got to do it consciously from the, you've got to send the signal to do it. You've just got to, just in exactly the same way as I'm sending the signal to do that, in exactly the same way I want a pulse induction to a muscle, to a knee or something like that. So it doesn't involve visualization at all, but it's still mental induction. So when I say that mental induction is more complicated than just visualization or the use of imagination that some people talk about, this is far more sophisticated than that. It's far more complex and involved. So that's a lot of talk. So the exercise we want from our basic posture, and remember we kind of sat down and bent at the knees. Our legs aren't straight up like that. We kind of sat down. This in itself is training this, what I've talked about, the consistency of our configuration, finding the right balance between relaxation and tension. It can be quite hard to hold this for a longer period. And what we're going to do, we've done puzzles before, zhan puzzles, where we've talked about pushing out like that and pushing in like that, but not, of course it does use muscle, but the absolute minimal basic muscle, and just using our mental induction to just visualize that we're pushing out. And then there's the visualization, and then there's the muscle response. And what we can think of visualization as is the signal to do it. So that normally, like if you do something like that, where's the signal to do it? How do you experience the signal to do it? How am I experiencing the signal to do that? Like I'm consciously doing it. I can talk about the fact that I'm waving my arm up and down like this, chopping my arm up and down, but how do I experience the signal? I just don't experience it consciously. So what this idea of visualization does, it starts creating like a link to the signaling process. So let's imagine I'm lifting a bucket up like that, and I start thinking about lifting a bucket up, and then I think about lifting the bucket up in different ways, and I'm starting to create some kind of mental link from the mental into the physical. In fact, I'm trying to access it. I'm trying to access the controls of physical movement in a more direct way. So as we do this, and let's say we imagine visualizing, pushing out, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We've got the muscle response, we've got the signal that makes the move, and through visualization we're trying to find that point where they come together like that. They come together. So normally you won't experience the signal that makes it work. You'll just experience the muscle. You'll experience the muscle go like that, because I can do that. And if you do that, I mean, it's worth doing that and just having to think like, where is the signal for that? Because I'm not experiencing that in my mind. I'm only experiencing it in my legs. That my legs are moving. So it isolates the intention into the legs. I mean, it's interesting in itself because it tells us something about intention and the idea of intention being in the body. I can't feel anything in my mind that's making me do that. There's no interlink with that. It just feels like the signal to do it itself just exists in the legs. And have a think about that. It's quite interesting. So through visualization, we're trying to bring that back into something closer to conscious control. Of course, it's going to go back into the intuitive level. After this, it's a training stage. We're going to bring it up into conscious control and then back into the intuitive level later. And we're going to do that, of course, because we want to restructure the entire body movement. We want to create our Yiquan body that I was looking at in another video. And this is the process, the way that we do it. So by using visualization, we bring the control factor right into our conscious mind. So we can then just start linking it to the muscle movement itself, visualizing pushing out, visualizing it, using no muscle whatsoever. Now I'm not even getting the feeling that I'm pushing out. Now I'm just engaging muscle. And I bring them up like that. Now what happens when you start using clumsy force is you start using more muscle. Start using them tensing. I'm tensing to push out. So my legs are actually going out because I'm doing it. Yeah, so drop the muscle, bring the visualization back, the mental induction back. Just visualize pushing out. Just visualize that I'm sending the signal. And this is why we use visualizations, because it's a lot easier to do that. For example, if I imagine there's like 2 bamboo poles there, or 2 people with their hands on my legs like that, stopping me from pushing them out, and I push against them. It just makes it much easier to bring this into conscious control so that I can start restructuring the pathways that create this effect. So too much clumsy force, yeah, too much use of the mind, there's no effect whatsoever. They've got to get to this point. So at this point, I'm visualizing pushing out against 2 people who are holding their hands against my legs. And also it's starting to engage the liminal level of muscle use. I'm recruiting just a minimum amount of muscle use to create that feeling that I am pushing out. So it's by no means just in my mind. And we can see the point of the visualization now, that it brings it into conscious control. That's never going to be functional, of course, like in martial arts terms, until it goes back into being intuitive, but this is just a training stage. So we've done that way, and we've done that, we did it in, we talked about, I can't remember if we talked about doing it, no we didn't, just out and in I think. But what we want to do now is visualise pushing forward this way, with this part of the body pushing forward. And what we want to do is use pulse induction now. So instead of using isometric induction, where we're visualising pushing something forward, we want to just like send the signal to do that with the knee. P-U-L-S-E, pulse, like your pulse induction. Now if I do it big, you can see, just like I say, pulse induction is really just tensing the muscle. But what we want to do is take it right down to the liminal level. So tensing the muscle and doing that like a muscle twitch, that's like the mental induction is down here, and the clumsy force is up here, just using the muscle. We want to bring that back up like this. But it's a little bit more than isometric, so we want to use a little bit more. It's a bigger movement, so, you know, obviously isometric movement, there's no movement. You can use micro movement, but there's no real movement. For pulse induction, we've got to bring a little bit more of the muscle use into it, but we want to get it really, really liminal. If I do it, I don't think, probably can't even see it on camera, but I can feel it, like the muscles here just going like that. And it's absolutely fine to start with just like a bigger movement like that. We're going to bring it up into a bigger movement anyway. This is what we're doing. We're stripping down our movement to its absolute core elements, and we're refining our ability to do this from the smallest possible micro level, and then building it up. So using that pulse induction, just almost like someone put an electric shock through your knees, and they just react like that, just a little bit like that. I'll do it bigger. I'll do it even bigger. That what? Yeah, that wasn't it. See, the relaxation wasn't right then. That's it. Not quite. Yeah. So when you get it right, like this, for a little bit of a bigger movement, one of the things that we're going to see is that the quad goes in like that. Good. See, the knees come out and the quad goes in. We want to get that down to a micro movement, and again work on the relaxation of the whole posture. And what we do is, if we build up the intensity of that step by step, then eventually it's going to be the foundation of Fa Li, and this is how we build up Fa Li step by step. And that's that exercise. I want you to practice that exercise, and then it feeds into the thing that we want to talk about today, which is linear Fa Li. Now, by the term linear Fa Li, we mean multiple different things. So we're just using that term to differentiate from this kind of rotational or centrifugal Farley, where we're turning round the axis this way, like this. And we're going to change our conceptualization. In fact, we've already started looking at linear Farley when we started doing, for example, seeking step. In fact, I've already demonstrated when I was demonstrating this kind of movement, and I talked about this kind of headbutt movement and this movement, like a car suddenly braking. That's linear Farley. It's one kind of linear Farley. Actually, linear Farley can be in other directions as well. It doesn't have to be forward. Let's just keep it a little bit simpler for the moment. And what we're doing when we're using this kind of movement, linear Farley like this, is we're using a different axis. This time the axis is crossways, this way in our body. We can think about it very simply as just folding the body in half round this axis. So doing that like that. Only, well, we'll look at it in a moment how to make that movement more powerful. Now we've got two axes that our body is working around. One's going this way through the body, and one's going this way. And remember when I talked about the zhan talking about if you have even just two joints working together, they create an almost infinite possibility of variations in their movement. Yep. If you want to do this kind of snaky, I'll do snake form. I'll put it on the channel at some point. I've got a pretty banging snake form, I have to say. Now it's the same thing, same but different. We've got these two axes, one here, and one here. And now these can do lots of interaction, and by interacting, once we get these two different kinds of Farley, just by interacting, just through roundness and forward and back, we can create a lot of very complex movements and use lots of different interesting kinds of Farley and start experimenting with some other things. For example, things like spiral force, where you not fake spiral force, like magic power kind of thing, but where you can move someone, just see how small the movement is. Really, it's just that, it's just using our two axes in a much more complicated way. There's other things involved as well, but it starts to open a doorway to a whole range of different complex kinds of Farley that use rotation across both axes together. So things are getting a bit more complicated now. Let's start exploring that, and exploring it in the context of the zhan zhuang exercise that we've just done, because the first kind of linear Farley using this horizontal axis is just to bend forward like this. And let's just imagine you want to headbutt someone like that. And we're not trying, you've got to be careful with doing these kind of headbutt exercises, and you've got to be careful of the whiplash on your neck. So I'll just demonstrate that. Keeping the legs straight, you can do like that. And you can just use like the weight of the head, and a little bit of the upper body is in it. It's not that powerful. What we can do then is just change a little bit. So we can just keep the legs completely straight and bend at the horizontal axis like that. And it doesn't really add that much force in. It adds a little bit of body weight into the posture. It's still mass times speed, so from that perspective you can say it's still, if Farley just means like to release force, you can still say that it's just that. But we want something more than that. We want to maximise our power potential. So the next thing we want to do is the exercise that we've just done. But we need to bring into our body consistency, a configurational consistency, the degree to which we find the right balance between relaxation and tension and the interconnection of all our body parts together. We want to find that correct relaxation in the quad and the legs, and we want to do the thing that we've just done there with the pulse induction like this, and we just want to do it like you're going to knee something. There's something there, and you're just going to release energy with the knees, Farley with the knees. Like that, you're just going to push something away like that. So we've taken that movement that we practiced, we broke it right down to the absolute minimal level. And then we're just bringing it up we're bringing it back up now into a bigger movement. And hopefully by doing that practice, we can do it a lot better and we can get a lot more force on it, like that. And this does something really interesting. So let's say, for example, that we do want to headbutt like that. The knees are going forward, the head's going forward, but something really, really interesting is happening. That makes us think all our energy is going forward, but it's not. So like our kind of whole body power, whole body weight concept, where it's just the weight of the body. If you did something like that, kind of frog style headbutt like that, toad headbutt. Actually, part of our body's going back, our bum's going back. So when the knees go forward, look, the bum goes back like that. Or, you know, more technically, the quad goes in. Knees go forward, the quad goes back like that. It's a really simple engineering concept. Like, instead of just leaning forward from the body like that, we compensate and the bum goes back and the chest goes forward. So we keep it actually more in line with a completely vertical centre line like that. It's now going slightly through the back of our head, rather than leaning forward like that, so that all our weight is forward. The bum goes out and we're balanced a lot better. And all that comes from just far leap from the knees like that, just release force from the knees, pushes the bum back, and that makes the body go forward. Now instead of doing that like that, we can now get a lot more force in the posture, because we're adding in this posture with the quad. So then we need to coordinate knees going forward, and at the same time thinking about far lead backwards with the backside, like that. It's a really simple mechanical. You can just practice with it yourself and try doing it without and just try adding in that posture like that. And you'll see how much more powerful it is. Now we're starting to reconstruct the body's functional movement in order for it to express intent. Like, it's not just something like the intent can just do this. The intent's got to have the best possible machine to run, and that machine's got to be capable of doing these postures. And once we've trained that, then after that, that's when the intuition comes in. Then you can intuitively do that. That should be obvious, you know. It's not some magical force. It's the same in every sport, that you have to train the core techniques for your intention to be able to use them intuitively. Just think for now, like, well, we're going to take this idea a little bit further. I'm going to do our basic. We're going to go into our basic stance now, and we're going to take this same idea, but it's going to be a little bit different. For the most part, there's going to be a difference between legs, and what we're going to practice is basic front push this way, the most basic kind of linear far leap. And you can see straight away that this foot's doing something different. This is doing this, what we call scrape rooting, that goes like, which is a lot harder to do than it looks. Things that have become so second nature to you that you just assume that all human beings can do it, you realise that other people just absolutely cannot do. So I know that this is harder than it looks, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But we've taken this like this, and we've changed the foot out like that. That's all it is, this, and we've changed it out like that. And we can do that with both knees like that. We can do that like that, no problem. But usually we don't. So usually we add in this scrape rooting, and what this does, of course, it's just a very simple law of physics. It's just adding momentum into the mass times speed. So it's just adding that little bit of momentum in that creates more force in the effect. And when we do that, something changes in this posture. So if we just do it on the spot like that, just do it on the spot, both knees are going out like that. When we change like that, only this knee is really doing that to the same degree, only the back leg, and the foot's at 45 degrees just as it normally was. And this changes, so it doesn't go out like that, the foot goes out Actually, we triggered a pulse, the muscle pulsing exactly the same way. You can even, like if you were here, you could put your hand on my knee, you could feel the, like I can feel it like that. You feel the muscle, you can feel it in yourself. To trigger this movement. But we absolutely don't want this knee to go too far like that. Then you'll feel the strain straight away in your inner thigh muscles, and the posture starts, well, we call it, well, usually when we do that, we call it frogging or frog legging, like that, but it's a little bit like frog legging like that. We don't want that. So this knee kind of does a version of that, but now it's curtailed. And remember, we talked about this key idea of curtailment that is developed through zhan, the ability to stop postures before they reach their full potential size. And it's a kind of curtailment like that. So now the intention's got to be able to calculate doing that much more fully than that. And to cut a long story short, all of that just links together into just adding force into the push. And the thing I want to say about that is, you don't need to do zhan to do that. Anyone can do that. Anyone can practice that. Anyone can get that. The idea that somehow you would need to spend hours practicing zhan before you would develop the ability to do that is ridiculous. You could teach anyone to do it. This narrative that people talk about, you go practice zhan and develop some kind of whole body unified force, and then it eventually leads into being able to do this posture. That's incredibly misleading. What zhan does is, well, one of the primary things that it does is knit together your body into this correct form of postural consistency, configurational consistency. I don't want to keep explaining that, so let's just say for the last time it is that interconnection, all the parts of the body in this kind of springy combination, dialectical interaction of relaxation and tension, and we'll just call it configurational consistency or consistency from now on. So what zhan does is really trains your consistency, your body consistency. That's far harder. Like, it's not hard. It's like Guo Yunshan said it. Really, it's not that hard. It's just that people don't want to do it, and they want it to be fancier than what it is. Again, Guo Yunshan said, like, people just give up on Xing Yiquan because they want it to be more than what it is, and they don't want to just do basic training for something that's really basic, and they don't want to accept that it's just the development of basic skills that are then brought into the reality of the fight, and it's something else within the reality of the fight. It's how you use those basic skills. That's the real thing, the real high level art. People want to believe that the real high level thing is some kind of shortcut, like development of a magic power or something like that. And that's very much fed by the idea of whole body integrated force. And it's also fed by the constant use of Chinese terms to non-Chinese speakers. You'll see that I avoid doing that all the time. What we're trying to learn is already complex enough without also having to remember tons and tons of different Chinese names for things. Do that by all means if it's just out of interest, but be really wary of this thing. Like, it's almost like, you know, back in the day, Catholic priests using Latin, that it creates a priestly class who use all these terms, and it's very exclusionary to everyone else. And you know, the reason the priestly class do that, A, is to keep everyone out, but B, to create a mystique and make things seem much more than what they are. If you say something in Latin, someone curses you in Latin, you know, that sounds like a proper curse. But if they just curse you in English, it maybe just sounds ridiculous. In exactly the same way, if you start using Chinese terms, it can, for non-Chinese speakers, it can appoint all these expectations, and it feeds into this kind of Orientalism where people imagine there's some kind of magic waiting to be discovered. It's not just me saying this. This is Zhao Daoxin talks about this idea of even people in China thinking like there's some monk somewhere in Tibet who's got all this mystical powers, and he says it's the modern day version of thinking like, you know, some kind of knight in shining armour is going to come and save you. It's how ordinary people start to negotiate feeling powerless and oppressed, that they imagine that there's something out there that can transform them into something that where the rules don't apply in the same way to them. It's a product of an alienated world. So if we say something like, even when we Even when we translate it into English, we still have, or another non-Chinese language, we still have exactly the same problem of appointing expectations about these things. Remember, the way is not far from the people, the key Taoist concept. The way is not far from the people. It's just your expectation of what the way is that keeps you separated from it. This is the key idea that Wang Xing tries to get across, that it's not this immortal flying swordsman thing. It's not up here. It's all really down to earth. It's all really basic stuff. Again, Guo Yunshen telling us, it's all really basic stuff. Don't appoint expectations about it. When you see it like that, it's like, oh, it's just that. Oh, I get that. That's easy. Anyone can do that. I get that. Then it's like, yeah. Actually, it's all completely down to earth. Then it becomes within reach. The problem is, if I'm completely honest, most people don't want it to be within reach. They want to believe that there's that monk in a cave in Tibet that's got magic powers. But let's not go too far into that. So when we say something like whole body unified force, and people say, well, you must practice zhan to get whole body unified force, that causes us to appoint expectations about that thing, that it's so much more than what it is. I'm not saying it's not ultimately sophisticated. It's not easy to do what I do, but it's not that hard. I'm just a human being, and I wasn't like by any means, the most talented student of my coach, far from it. It's all just training, hard training, just thinking about it and practicing and being diligent. If instead of whole body unified force, we just say using your body in a more coordinated manner, all of a sudden it just goes, oh, that? Oh, you just mean that? And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it's just that, it's just this little thing here, just this daft little thing here. It's like, yeah, actually that's a piece of the infinite Tao right in your hand. You just don't see it because you wanted it to be so much more, and you don't understand the profound nature of simple things. And when you do, the door just opens. That's the key. Which is a very long-winded way of saying that this is really simple, and you can use improved body coordination just by practicing it, doing basic exercises around it. You can improve your coordination, doing it a bit on the bag or something like that can improve body coordination. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it by starting doing it on the bag, it's not. But what zhan does is cultivation. It starts knitting this body coordination together in a much more refined way, and it starts helping us develop our consistency, so that really doing this isn't the issue. Doing it with force against an object is the issue, and for that we need the correct consistency in the arms and the body. And remember, I've talked about, if you just do it like that, for one thing, you don't get this springy force in it. This idea of, with our Yiquan body, this rounded Yiquan body is storing force, this idea of storing force, the release force into our curtailed form, so it doesn't extend into the brittle square structure like that, square force. As we'll look at when we talk about legs and kicks, if you lock out like that, it can transmit force, but your arms can't take that force. You develop too much force, and it can obviously just like ping your muscles out of ping your joints out of the socket and so on. We want springy consistency, and that's what's developed through zhan. One of the things that's developed through zhan. As you can see from the pulse induction exercise, it does more as well. We can start working on triggering Fa-Li, we can call it like the bud of Fa-Li. So when we do something like that, we just trigger the muscle. It's the bud, planting the bud of Fa-Li that's going to grow eventually into full-on Fa-Li. And then the next thing to say about that is that this posture has got to release real force. So I'm forever seeing people going like, and the reality is, surely they themselves can't even they can't believe, really, they can't, that if they do that to someone, that someone's going to fly away. There's a certain point where there's got to be real kinetic force, and it's got to be equal to the the weight that you want to move in order to be able to move it in the way that they're stood and so on. So just doing it like that doesn't do anything. You could do that as an exercise, like Fa-Li from the wrist, just to get because that can be important. Like if you're close in, you need to get the the hands in the right position before you do it, otherwise your fingers are going to get caught on the chest or whatever, and you're going to hit like that. Backhand. So if it's just that in itself, like the fast twitch movement from the arms, then yeah, okay, that's okay. But believing that like you're going to do that against a person, you know, you get mugged and you go like that. You're going to go like that. I don't know what you're doing. It's not working. You know, it's not going to work, is it? You know, it's got to be, everything that we're trying to do here is to develop real ability to genuinely issue force. The way that we develop that ability is step by step, but we're going to start like this, and we're going to think like, we're going to, as the foot goes out, we want to talk about that, don't we, first? So, this posture here, this scrape rooting, this is a lot harder than it looks because it's just like seeking step where the ball of the foot lands first and then the heel hits the floor, only you do it in a micro version, and that's not easy. It's not easy just to lift the heel up a slight little bit and then drop down. I think sometimes the impression is given that like if you just do standing that you'll develop that kind of ability, but no, it comes through practicing it loads. There's no easy way. Again, Guoyuan Shensei, you know, the constant repetition, intelligent repetition, but nevertheless constant repetition of very simple things until they become intuitive. So if I exaggerate it, the foot lifts, the heel lifts up and then just drops down like that, and then drops back. The heel lifts up and it pulls back. So if it was exaggerated, it'd be like that. Very much like a kind of sort of kind of step you do. It's going over. So you get a chat show off. Very much like that kind of footwork you're doing in breakdance or something like that. But we do it a tiny little bit, and it creates a certain kind of sound that you can hear. Where I'm not going to do it on this floor, but I don't want to do it on this floor. It's making me not do it. The heel hits the floor and you can really hear it. You can hear that it's done that. It's a really solid hit with the, like you're releasing force into the ground like that. And that's what makes the structure absolutely solid at the impact point. So you can hear that sound when people do it right, and I can listen for it when they're doing it, and I can tell that they're either scraping with the whole foot and the heel isn't hitting in, or they're just scraping with the ball of the foot or something like that. I can tell. You could do it with the ball of the foot like that, but then this is weak. It's too weak. You want the heel to go in, because the idea is you're going to push someone who's solid. You don't need to push a whole person's weight, by the way. Like if they just stood like that, you only need to push like the top half of their weight over their horizontal axis to get them off balance. So you need to push that much weight at least. Then the other things to say about that is we see this demonstrated all the time, like particularly in push hands, like doing this kind of thing. Actually, it's not that hard to push someone over, particularly if they're off balance or you get them off balance. It's not that hard. So very often the demonstrations we see are against people who are just completely hopeless. I'd say 95% of the demonstrations that are on, for example, YouTube or something like that, even if the other person is actually really good at what they're doing, nevertheless the person they're doing it against isn't, and they're totally hopeless and just go like that, and then they get thrown into a wall, pushed into a wall or something like that. And even though it might look impressive, you try doing that against someone who's enraged, who's mad, who's strong, who's coming at you, right? You just go like that and you think like, nah. And particularly when people are coming at you, their energy is forward, they're leaning forward in a little bit with it. So those are very misleading, all those push hands demonstrations we see where people do that, very often done against people who just, they have no defense whatsoever. But even then, if they were enraged and really trying to kill you, they wouldn't be coming at you like that, you know. So the art is in the chaotic moment, being able to see when someone's off balance and then just going for going for the push. It's actually really hard to push someone in the chest to get to the chest. If you try doing it, put the gloves on and try doing like Sandar rules or something like that and try and get to the chest for a push through the guard. It's really, really difficult. And yeah, you can do all this kind of fancy kind of push hands thing, pulling the guard out of the way, guard breaking and stuff like that. But most people don't just give in and stand there and let you do that. And they change the chase. It's quite hard to get through. But what is a lot easier to do is to push guards or push the side of the arm. When you just see someone just standing there, particularly in sparring, people have these moments where they just kind of stop and they're just kind of getting a breathe, and then you go and push through and push on the arm or just push on the key critical points that look solid in the direction that they're on their weakest axis. And it's pretty easy. It's really easy to push people over. That's, you know, that's nothing. The hard thing is not getting punched in the face while you're doing it and spotting it and going for it in the right moment. Those are the hard things. The push is nothing. It's easy. It's easy. Something else. That's something else that we can talk about in a moment that you don't very often. It's very rare that you will be doing it like this anyway. So as we do this, as this linear file goes like that, goes out and then it comes back. So this is exactly what I talked about a couple of videos back, where I talked about using the muscle bounce. One of the key ideas of our developed consistency, that all the muscles fly off the bone like that, and we use that sense of rebound. It's actually not just in the thigh muscle, it's in all the muscles. All the muscles fly forward and then we just go with the movement back like that. And the reason is just not to stay in this wider posture. It actually doesn't matter that much to pull it back, but the idea is usually that your posture's gone a little bit wider when you're doing it, one, and you pull back into your guard. But you can just do it, you know, straight into another. You can use like hit and stop and straight into another posture, no problem. With our body, we create this rounded. See, it's just exactly what I talked about before. This axis, if you think about this axis as a bar, it doesn't just tip forward, it goes back like that. In fact, it doesn't even tip forward, the body tip forwards. The axis just goes back like that, tipping our body forward. And when we change that side on into it looks like this, and it creates this arc into the push. And when you come to do it on a bag, then you can really feel why you need to take this posture. It really transfers the force really well really solidly into the contact point, so into the push point, like that. And again, this doesn't look like much, like what the arms are doing doesn't look like much, but that's again an optical illusion, because most of the power isn't coming from the arms. Some of it is, obviously, but it's the whole body into the movement is generating the force like this, and the arms just push out a little bit like. So it doesn't have to be a massive movement, and that's a very deceptive thing when you see people doing it, and you think like, that's too small a movement. It's too small a movement. It's not. It's the whole body is in the movement and generating force. That's far more musculature than is just in your arm. Like in it's an optical illusion, because in our mind we think if someone just did that, that's a more powerful movement than just doing that, because it's a bigger movement. But these two puny arms, compared to the whole of my body into it, there's no contest. It's much more powerful, even for a shorter movement. And there's a couple of different ways, like one, or well, anywhere all the way into like about that far into the movement. I find that's a little bit harsh on my hands. I usually turn in a little bit like that with it when I'm doing it on the bag. I find it pushes my hands back too much, even with years of Shang training like this. I still find it's too harsh like that. But you need to adapt that anyway to a particular target. Like if you're just going to push on someone's shoulder or elbow, so you need to practice at different angles and levels. So depending on what you're going to push against, the hands closer together and hands further apart. And you also need that without the pull back, so just practicing and then back and both. Anyone can learn that. You can start learning that straight away, no problem. There's absolutely no scientific, logical, methodological or training reason why people should have to do standing before they can do this posture. Standing for this just aids the consistency of your posture and the ability to use this kind of pulsing movement to generate Farley, and it hones and cultivates your ability to do that to higher degrees over time. Mostly that's all. You know, it doesn't teach you this posture. Anyone can learn this posture like this. So practice that on its own, just like. And some of the things that I think are wrong that you see all the time is people doing this first, like doing this movement first, and it's a little bit deceiving because you think you're going one and then pulling back into the one and then relaxing back, one, relaxing back, but actually, because you're phasing them, doing them over and over like that, what you're really doing is one into the posture, one into the posture like that, and that's obviously not what you want. What you want is straight off the spot, no pull back, like that. And once you've got the double push like that, you can start thinking, well, you can do single push just the same, like that. And usually when we do single push, we start bringing this in again, just a little bit, because we start adding in a little bit of the vertical. We're no longer just using our horizontal axis, we start to bring in the vertical axis like this. I'm just adding. And once you've practiced like double hand like that, then there's a few variations you can think. Single hand like this. Start getting just a little bit of this movement into it, just to counterbalance and add a little bit in. Particularly if you go further out. And you'll see when you do that, that's much more awkward on this side. That doesn't feel structurally integrated into the posture at all. That doesn't even feel rooted really. It's quite an odd to do it like that. And that's because it's a cross, so you don't want to root it from the front. You want to root it from if you're going to push with this hand, usually you just change into just like it was a cross and push that way, like that, rather than using linear Farley, you use rotational centrifugal Farley. And that again speaks back to this idea that I talked about. There's very often 2, maybe even 3 ways of doing a posture within structural movement. And what you've got to decide is which one is scientifically right. So if I go like that, it doesn't feel right at all, but that feels rooted and strong that way. But I can get away with that, and I can get away with that as well. They feel pretty much equally rooted and strong and able to deliver force. So if we go single hand with it, it's generally the front hand. And also there's another variation, which is to palm in this way. And if we imagine like my opponent's body is on an angle like that, exactly mirroring mine, and I'm going to push right into the chest. Well, you see this hand starting to get involved again with a little bit of the vertical axis. Like that. And you can do it like that. You can do it like that as well with the pivot routing or the scrape routing. Or most of these anyway you can do with the scrape routing, because that was the original kind of movement paradigm that was drawn in from Yiquan. Other than that, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same posture, other than you've got to start drawing in this rotational Farley. So maybe that's like our first big example of how we're using linear Farley and rotational or centrifugal Farley. Going that way, and we're going that way. And we've got to remember, I talked about the idea of timing. That's another key element that you can't get it from standing, but the way that the body knits together through standing feeds into our development of timing, because we need a much finer grained control of the interconnection of body parts to get the timing right for that posture. Once you've got that, the next thing that will start occurring to you is that it's quite static off the spot like that. yeah, it would be kind of cool, like someone's arguing with you, go down like that, smack right into the mate. 3 mates and they all hit each other, all headbutt each other one after the other and then fall over. That would be cool. But in reality, chaos is dynamic. So being on spot and being able to do this quite short range movement, that's only like a very small part of what we want with a posture like this, to make this functional, even just in sparring, to make it functional. We need to be able to move with it. And this is something that you see a lot. You see like, what? Where? Come here. Come here. Come on. What you barking at? Be good. We'll go down in a minute. This is something that you see quite a lot. Practicing this. Moving like that. And what that's practicing is that it's really, really hard to do this kind of posture while you're moving. You just go into it like that. Off the spot, where you feel really strong rooted from your back foot like that, that's quite easy. But as soon as you start moving around with it, that becomes much more difficult. So the way we start training that is just like with the punches. We practice exactly the same with the scrape rooting, only like with the seeking step. And we do that with a punch. All the seeking step is scrape rooting just extended into a step. When we do it with the push, instead of like using the vertical rotational farley around the axis, we use the horizontal farley around the quad axis, like that. And to get it to we can practice it like that at first, just dragging the back foot forward like that. But that's not the most useful way of doing it because it's not rooted very strongly, and also it's a little bit short. If we turn up on the back foot like that, we can do something really interesting. We can make it a lot easier to get these hands in line for a start. So if you think like our natural posture is like that, it makes it a lot easier just to do that so that they're in line for the push. It also leans the whole thing forward more, so we get more distance on the push. It makes it easier to do this rounded posture. It makes it more flat on like this. And also it gets all our springy directional aspects going in the same direction. So remember when I talked about when you throw a cross, you want the knee to be in line with the cross, and that creates a stronger line like that. If you do it like that, the knee's pointing out like that, so some force is dissipating out like that. And we want all force into the target like that. As soon as you turn it up on the back foot like that, all the force is going forward into the target. So actually the way to practice this is like that. Like that into the like that. Into the, and remember then we've got to coordinate the seeking step, the pulling back with the quad axis, sticking the bum out and turning the heel up and dropping into the rounded structure and the double push. So it's quite a lot to mentally process and put together. Okay, that's why you need to develop higher level motor control function through your standing. Using our concepts of the infinite curriculum, and we can think exploring, well, what's the next, what can we build from those building blocks that we've got, so we can go 1, 2, like that, 1, 2, and you should start seeing here a kind of structural symmetry, that this is very much like the jab, and this is very much like the cross. 1, 2, we can even do 1, 2 like that. if we want. But it's very much like that's the jab and that's the cross. Like that. Like that. And practice it like that. So like 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. I'm not going to do everything full power here. You don't need to do it when you're practicing on the air like this. You don't need to do it full power first. Just get, as I've said multiple times, you lose the configuration if you start doing that. You lose the consistency. You need to practice it light, get the feeling, and then move into it a bit later on. By no means don't start thinking like you need to do a year of zhan zhuang or something like that to get this. Anyone can start doing this straight away. And you can go and see me doing it like full power on the air and full power on a bag. And plenty of times where I do it on sparring partners, so like right in the middle of sparring, straight in, boom, you know. Getting some quite dramatic effects in some cases just because they're off balance. So I just hit them perfectly with my superior structure and they go off balance. But I mean, the dog pushes me over sometimes, you know, like just jumps up and, you know, it's not hard to push someone over. It's having the wherewithal, the mental, being engaged enough to see the opportunity, because on a deep level your intent just knows that's where the opening is and it just goes for it like that. Another important variation is to step through into the push like this. And there's two variations of this. So one, a little bit shorter, we keep the back foot flat like that, and then the reason for doing that is it's less to think about with this kind of movement, and it works just as well because it's a little bit shorter range. We're making up the distance with the step, so it's we can usually be a little bit shorter range with it. But of course the other way to do it is to twist up onto the back foot like that, just like we did before, and that's not wrong. So both are right. For me personally, I always feel like this feels better for this posture. It just anchors into the floor more, whereas that always just feels like the timing is out. And also think about this idea. So when we talk about the Yiquan principle of the unity of hand and fist, if we just said timing, like if we just disappointed our expectations about these concepts, if we just mean timing, then all of a sudden it comes right back down to earth and it becomes achievable for us mere mortals, which, after all, I assure you, the former Yiquan masters were just mere mortals. Timing into getting our momentum into the push like that. There's other ways of doing this with what we call explosive footwork, and I've got demonstrations of doing that. We'll talk about that another time. It's a little bit more when we change into the without a drag through. We just change very fast with the footwork and use explosive footwork. It's a higher level of each one skill that we want to look at another time. For now, we can just practice. We can practice one like that, and we can practice two onto the ball of the foot. Try both and see what they feel like. The ball of the foot one again just lets you get a little bit longer. To me, it feels a little bit more fussy and unstable, but both are right. So whatever works for you. Moving back, then we usually do, rather than going 1, 2 like that, 1, keeping it flat and pushing like that, we lose a lot of power with the movement. Whereas if we go back, if our first step is back into the kickback routine like that, it's faster and we generate more power from it. So again, you can feel it yourself, like it's the timing. The harmony is wrong. Look at the harmony. 1, it's at the same time. 1 flat, it's 1, 2. It's what, remember I talked about the idea of a split harmony, that it goes 1, 2 if you do it like that. It doesn't have to, but it feels really, really awkward to do that to me. Whereas if I just step back into the kickback routine, 1, the harmony is spot on, the structure is stronger, and because I'm moving backwards and losing that momentum force, I can compensate for that with the push forward from the leg. The much stronger push forward that this gives that this doesn't. To push forward this way is just like that much more difficult, and also it forces you to use more brittle force because your leg is straighter to get that effect rather than the more it bends, the more the force is going that way. So pushing into it like that just feels a much stronger rooted posture than that, which feels awkward. But again, it's not wrong, so I wouldn't, like if someone did it like that and they can make it work, it's like the kicks, not everyone turns the foot when they kick, but they make it work because they use more linear far lead than rotational far lead. If you can make it work, it doesn't make any difference. For me, just bringing in a little bit of that rotational far lead around this axis just adds in a lot more. But you can practice both, but I recommend this one onto the posture like that. Explain a couple more and then that will be enough to be going on to practice with. So remember, I've talked about this idea of using muscle rebound and the way that helps us improve our structural combination speed. An idea I'm going to come back to. Well, we can use that here as well. If we go 1, 2, so 1 into the double push and then rebound back and then straight into the diagonal push like and move off that very irritating bit. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, like that. And try and really focus on the foot just goes forward both times like that. So even though the hand's going that way, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's a good exercise to practice. And then the last one, coming right back to the start to this, the fight starter push that you will very often see, like to generate force. When you see people who can't do this, they'll usually lift up. Wow. You what? Whereas to generate force, we don't just want to use our horizontal axis like this, we want to tip it to one side like that. So when we push like that, push, just adds a little bit more force into it. And what it's actually doing is just adding a little bit more rotational force around the vertical axis like that. When you do that, just a little bit into it. So it's just a slight compromise in the movement, but it generates more force. It punches above its weight really, because it's just a tiny little rotation like that, but it adds a lot more force into the movement. You can feel it on the back. If you try doing it like that and try doing it with a little, just dip the leg like that and the body will naturally just get that little bit of rotational force in it, and that just helps the posture like that. For your fight start, also gets the head out of the way a little bit like, and that's the other thing to think about like, when we think about the reality of the context of the fight. When you push people, they don't just get pushed back. Only in Yiquan videos do people just get pushed back and give in and stand on the wall like that while they're getting hit. In reality, they try and hit you back, and when you push them, their arms come up and they try and grab onto you. So you'll see it all when I'm demonstrating. I'll very often practice like push and cover, because they go for the head grab like that. Go for the head grab. You see it all the time. You see it in sport fighting where that kind of thing's allowed as well. People don't just get pushed back; they go for the grab, and the fingers can go in your eyes and anything. So don't just think that that's it, that you've got moving and that's it. Right? They're going to grab you. One, pull your hands back out of the way. Don't thumb yourself in the eye once you cover up, and practice that as well. So thinking about the context of the reality of the fight. And what you do then is very simply get your punch bag and you just practice it, testing structure really light. Just test, 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 test. Go back to this, go back to the pulse induction. Back, 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 back. Practice, practice. Practice different. Practice moving with it. Get back on the bag. Practice, practice. Again, just like we talked about, like using visualization and muscle control and trying to bring them together. There's the same thing with intuition and conscious intent. And I know some people have made a distinction between intention as like a planned thing, and intent as something intuitive. I don't buy into that at all, but the idea is there, but not in the way they mean it, because they mean like you should only use this intent, whereas that's because they never spar or do any kind of fight training whatsoever, so they live in a fantasy. Whereas in reality, you've got to be very consciously engaged. What is it we think people are doing when they're the coaches are shouting instructions to people in the ring, you know, like it's thinking about having a game plan, thinking about, he's dropping his arm there, and you know, I need to hit him there, and having in your mind things that you want to practice when you're sparring, and just thinking, I want to get the push in, so I'm going to really go for it. 1, 2, 3, right, go for it, and bringing it in consciously, and eventually it becomes much more intuitive. Like you just go for it. It just becomes part of the game that you do that kind of. I was getting a shoulder in there, but you start doing those things intuitively. And that's how you train that. So good luck with that. Do some drills around it. I'll do some follow-along drills around it later on that people can follow, but I think people can probably mostly work out those things. Hope that was helpful. It seemed quite. Side kicks are really exciting, and this just seems like very technical, but it's really, really important. All the things around it are really important. It's a very important concept that's then going to open the door to much more complex versions of structural movement, to anything we've looked at before. But for now, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. One love to all the world. Nourish everything. Compete with nothing. Don't find yourself getting in arguments on the internet, getting stressed out. Does it matter? And I'll see you again.